Beverly Hills emergency.
Yes, police.
What's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem?
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
The 911 call tore through the quiet of Beverly Hills. Erik Menendez's voice cracked, panicked, almost rehearsed. Police raced to the $5 million mansion on Elm Drive, the kind of home that glowed with wealth-white columns, manicured hedges, the perfect image of privilege. But when officers stepped inside, the illusion shattered. The television was still on, flickering across a half-empty bowl of popcorn on the carpet. A pair of shoes sat neatly by the sofa, as if their owners had just settled in for the night. But the living room told a darker story. Jose and Kitty Menendez were slumped on the couch, riddled with shotgun blasts. The walls dripped with blood. The expensive Persian rug beneath them was soaked through. It wasn't just a killing, it was an execution. At first, detectives whispered the same theory. A mob hit. The brutality, the precision, the lack of forced entry. But the more they looked, the less it added up. Nothing had been stolen. No signs of struggle beyond the gunfire. Whoever had done this hadn't come to rob. They had come to destroy. And soon, the trail led right back to the two young men who had made that desperate call, Lyle and Erik, sons of the slain couple. The Menendez brothers would become the face of one of America's most infamous trials. Two rich boys from Beverly Hills who murdered their parents. But behind the headlines was a story far more complicated, one filled with family secrets, abuse, and a nation divided over whether they were cold-blooded killers or desperate children trapped in a nightmare. And before we begin, would you do something for me? Go ahead and subscribe so you'll never miss a story. And while you're here, can you tell me what country you're watching from? This is how we find our neighbors in this little family of ours. They say you never truly know what goes on behind closed doors of privilege. For the Menendez family, Beverly Hills luxury masked a haunting story of ambition, despair, and heartbreak. Jose and Kitty Menendez were more than wealthy parents. They were emblematic of the American dream, and yet something in that dream had begun to crack from the inside. Jose Menendez was born in Havana, Cuba in 1944. From a young age, he came from a sports-oriented family. His father ran an accounting firm, and his mother was a swimmer of national renown. Sent to the USA in his mid-teens, Jose survived on a swimming scholarship and hustle. While studying accounting at Queens College, he scraped by washing dishes at a Manhattan restaurant. Jose eventually landed in corporate America. He moved from accounting to executive roles, first with Hertz, then to RCA Records, where he worked behind the scenes on deals for artists like Duran Duran, Eurythmics, and even the famed boy band Menudo. In the mid-1980s, he became the force behind turning around a nearly insolvent video distributor at Carolco Pictures, which became live entertainment under his leadership, transforming $20 million in losses into double-digit profits. Mary Louise Kitty Anderson, known to loved ones as Kitty, shared a more fragile story. Born in suburban Chicago in 1941, she was a beauty queen from the start, winning Miss Oak Lawn, but grew up in a home shadowed by domestic violence and instability. She later attended college, where she met Jose in a debate class. They married in 1963, defying his family's objections over his youth. Kitty put her career on hold to support Jose's ambitions and to raise their children, Lyle and Erik, in Princeton, New Jersey. But beneath the surface of domestic and social grace, Kitty struggled with emotional turmoil. Counseling testimony during the trials revealed she grew deeply despondent over Jose's years-long infidelity and had attempted suicide multiple times. By 1986, the family had moved to Beverly Hills, following Jose's rise in the entertainment industry. The Menendez home was grand, their lives seemingly gilded with success. But rigidity, pressure, and isolation were quietly mounting a stark prelude to the confrontation that would shatter everything So when police discovered Jose and Kitty executed in their living room in August 1989, it wasn't just a brutal crime, it was the collapse of two worlds that appeared perfect and a family imploding from within. The Menendez brothers, Lyle and Erik, were born into a world of privilege that many could only dream of. To outsiders, they were golden boys of Beverly Hills, young, handsome, wealthy, and seemingly destined for greatness. But inside their family home, the picture was far less perfect. Lyle Menendez, born in 1968, was the older brother. He was described as confident, even cocky, with a personality shaped by his father's expectations. He played tennis competitively, wore expensive clothes, and seemed to carry himself with the same forceful energy as Jose. Yet beneath the bravado, Lyle was insecure. He struggled academically, bouncing between colleges, and relied heavily on his family's name and money to define himself. Erik Menendez, born 3 years later in 1970, was softer in demeanor. He was quiet, shy, and highly sensitive compared to his older brother. Erik gravitated toward creative pursuits. He loved writing, movies, and especially tennis, which he played with remarkable skill. Some thought Erik might even go professional, but he lived under the same strict regime as his brother. Discipline first, freedom second. At the center of their world was Jose Menendez, whose success cast a long shadow. He demanded excellence, perfection, and obedience. He was the kind of man who thrived on control, whether it was running a multi-million-dollar entertainment company or shaping the lives of his children. Failure, in Jose's eyes, was not an option. Then there was Kitty Menendez. To many, she was a warm hostess, a loving mother, and Jose's loyal partner. But in reality, Kitty was unraveling. Years of Jose's infidelity, combined with her own struggles with depression, had left her fragile. By the late 1980s, she was drinking heavily, often retreating into silence or lashing out in bursts of anger. Her role as peacemaker in the household was fading, leaving her sons caught between a domineering father and a mother slipping away emotionally. And the brothers themselves, though they seemed privileged, were not immune to scrutiny. Teachers, friends, and coaches recalled odd behavior. Erik, despite his quiet charm, was known for bouts of anxiety and a tendency to withdraw. Lyle carried a reputation for entitlement, often talking about his family's wealth as if it was a shield against consequences. This dynamic, Jose's pressure, Kitty's instability, and the boys' growing resentment, was volatile. To outsiders, the Menendez family still looked enviable. Beverly Hills mansion, expensive cars, luxury vacations. But behind the mansion walls, fractures were spreading. What makes this story even more haunting is that these were not strangers at war. They were a family bound by blood, fortune, and reputation. And yet it was those very bonds that would push the Menendez brothers toward one of the most infamous parricides in American history. By the late 1980s, the Menendez household was a place of constant tension. From the outside, their Beverly Hills mansion symbolized success. Inside, it was becoming unbearable. Jose's control over his sons tightened as they grew older. He demanded results, top schools, athletic success, and unquestioning loyalty. Lyle was pushed to excel in college, Erik in tennis. Failure was not tolerated. It was punished, sometimes with humiliation. Friends recalled how the boys seemed less like children and more like soldiers in training, molded to serve their father's ambitions. Meanwhile, Kitty was unraveling. Once polished and social, she grew reclusive. Her depression deepened, and she turned increasingly to alcohol and prescription drugs. The strain of Jose's dominance and his alleged infidelities eroded her confidence. She lashed out unpredictably, sometimes withdrawing into silence, other times exploding in anger. For the boys, their mother no longer felt like a safe refuge. Lyle and Erik began showing warning signs of their own. Erik, normally quiet, confessed to friends that he was terrified of his father's control. Lyle, on the other hand, grew more reckless. He gambled thousands of dollars, got into petty trouble, and lived beyond his means, knowing his father would eventually cover the costs. But the real red flag came in August 1989. That summer, tensions reached a breaking point. Jose discovered that Erik had been failing academically and that both brothers had been lying about their responsibilities. The confrontation that followed was explosive. Some later testimony suggested that the boys feared more than disappointment. They feared retribution in ways they had never articulated before. Years later, during their trial, Erik and Lyle would claim that their father's control went far beyond strict parenting. They alleged years of abuse, psychological, emotional, and even sexual. Whether or not these claims were true became one of the most polarizing debates of the trial, but in the weeks leading up to the murders, Erik confided to his therapist that he was scared. He told a friend he felt trapped, that there was no escape from the walls of his father's power. This was the context in which the brothers began whispering to each other about the unthinkable. To some, it looked like desperation. To others, it was greed disguised as fear. What is undeniable is that by late summer 1989, Lyle and Erik were not just angry teenagers, they were young men plotting. They started buying guns, telling store clerks it was for protection. They drove around Beverly Hills late at night, rehearsing scenarios. Erik, racked with anxiety, would back out. Lyle, more forceful, would push him back in. It was only a matter of time before whispers became actions, and in just a few short weeks, the Menendez mansion would become the scene of a crime so brutal it would shock the world. By late summer 1989, the whispers between Lyle and Erik had hardened into something much darker. Their lives had become a strange, dual existence. By day, they played tennis, went to the movies, and smiled at friends. By night, they drove through Los Angeles in silence, circling the idea of killing their parents over and over again. They began buying weapons. In San Diego, the brothers purchased two 12-gauge shotguns, claiming they needed them for protection during a planned camping trip. The lie was thin, but it did not matter. They walked out of the store armed with the tools that would end their parents' lives. Their planning was meticulous. They mapped out the house, noting where their parents would likely be at night. They rehearsed escape routes, considering which roads they could take to avoid suspicion. And most chilling of all, they discussed how to explain it afterward, whether they would tell police it was a break-in or something even more elaborate. The tension inside the Menendez household only deepened. Jose had reportedly threatened to cut his sons off financially, angry over their lack of discipline and failure to meet his expectations. Kitty, meanwhile, was retreating further into depression, increasingly isolated and detached. For Erik and Lyle, the pressure built to a breaking point. They convinced themselves that the only way out, the only way to be free of their father's iron grip and their mother's silent complicity, was to kill them. But woven into their fear was another motive: money. With Jose's death, they stood to inherit millions. The estates, the businesses, the luxury properties, it would all pass to them. And so, beneath their talk of desperation, there was a promise of freedom, not just from control, but from financial limits. On the night of August 20th, 1989, the plan shifted from conversation to action. The brothers armed themselves with the shotguns and drove back to their Beverly Hills mansion, hearts pounding, mask of normalcy slipping away. They had convinced themselves there was no turning back. That night, the Menendez family's story would change forever. On the night of August 20th, 1989, the Menendez home in Beverly Hills seemed peaceful. Jose and Kitty were in the family room, watching television, surrounded by the comfortable symbols of wealth that defined their lives. But that calm was about to be shattered. Lyle and Erik entered the house with their shotguns. The decision had already been made. Hesitation was gone. They walked down the hall, adrenaline flooding them, every step echoing in their own heads. Jose never had a chance. He was sitting on the couch when the first blast tore into him, throwing his body backward in a spray of force. The sound of the shotgun echoed through the mansion, signaling the beginning of a nightmare. Kitty screamed. She tried to run, panic propelling her toward the hallway. The brothers reloaded quickly, blocking her escape. Terrified and wounded, Kitty struggled to get away, clawing for safety as the seconds stretched out. But the brothers had the upper hand. After reloading, they fired again, bringing her down. Still, she fought, injured, crawling, trying to survive. It took more shots before her body went still. The violence was relentless, and by the end, she was nearly unrecognizable. And then silence fell. Smoke hung in the air. The television still flickered faintly. The two brothers stood over the destruction they had created, guns in their hands, the reality of patricide and matricide settling in, but they were not finished, not yet. This was not just about killing their parents. They had to make it look like something else. They drove out, tossing the shotguns along Mulholland Drive, ditching their bloody clothes. Then, as if nothing had happened, they reportedly tried to buy tickets for Batman, using it as an alibi. But when they realized the theater printed time-stamped ticket stubs, they abandoned that plan and instead attended the Taste of Los Angeles Festival at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium. Hours later, they returned home, dialed 911, and staged their final act. Erik's panicked voice screamed down the line, "Somebody killed my parents." To the dispatcher, it sounded real. To the neighbors who rushed out, it looked real. And to the first police officers on the scene, the brutality of the attack seemed too extreme to be the work of two wealthy sons. It had all the markings of a mob hit. At least, that is what it looked like. For the time being, the Menendez brothers had pulled it off. When first responders entered the Menendez mansion on that August night, they were met with a horrifying scene. Jose slumped on the couch, Kitty sprawled on the floor, blood everywhere. The brutality of the murders suggested rage, but investigators initially leaned toward a professional hit. Jose had powerful business ties, and organized crime seemed a plausible explanation. But from the very beginning, there were cracks in the story. Detectives noticed there were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. The shotgun blast had been fired at close range, not in the manner of a typical execution-style hit. Still, the brothers' frantic 911 call and their visible grief bought them time. In the weeks that followed, Erik and Lyle leaned hard into their roles as grieving sons. They spent lavishly from their inheritance: luxury cars, designer clothes, Rolex watches, and even a restaurant investment. Their sudden spending spree, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars in just months, raised suspicions. If their parents' deaths had devastated them, why did their lives suddenly resemble a shopping spree? Police began watching them closely, but the break came not from forensics, but from psychology and confession. Erik, racked with guilt, confided in his therapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. During therapy sessions, he admitted that he and Lyle had killed their parents. Oziel's mistress, terrified for her own safety, secretly recorded conversations where the brothers' involvement was made clear. Those tapes would later become central to the case, though fought over endlessly in court. Meanwhile, investigators re-examined the crime scene evidence. The trajectory of the shotgun blast matched two shooters, not a single hitman. They learned that the shotguns had been purchased days earlier in San Diego under false names, with Lyle and Erik's handwriting visible on receipts. The alibi, too, began to unravel. Their attempt to go to the movies after the killings had been designed to suggest innocence, but inconsistencies in timing and the discarded plan to buy tickets exposed its weakness. By March 1990, the evidence had mounted too high. Erik returned from Israel, where he had briefly fled, and was taken into custody. Lyle was arrested soon after. The image of two well-dressed Beverly Hills sons in handcuffs sent shockwaves through the community. The narrative was no longer about a mysterious mafia hit. It was about two brothers accused of one of the most infamous parricides in American history. The arrest of Erik and Lyle Menendez marked the beginning of one of the most sensational trials in American history. Prosecutors framed the case around a single word: greed. They argued the brothers had executed their parents in cold blood to inherit their fortune, estimated at over $14 million. The lavish spending spree immediately after the murders became a cornerstone of this narrative. The trial itself became a spectacle, televised across the country, with the Menendez brothers at the center of a courtroom drama that blended family tragedy with Hollywood scandal. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. The receipts from San Diego showing the purchase of the murder weapons, the surveillance footage, the confessions captured by Dr. Oziel's mistress, and the inconsistencies in the brothers' alibis. But then came the defense, an argument that would divide the nation. Lyle and Erik claimed they had not killed their parents out of greed, but out of desperation. They testified about years of emotional, psychological, and even sexual abuse at the hands of their father, Jose. Kitty, they said, had turned a blind eye, enabling the cycle. Their defense painted a harrowing picture of two young men driven by fear, not money. Courtroom spectators were riveted. Some believed them horrified at the idea of long-hidden abuse behind the gates of a Beverly Hills mansion. Others saw the claims as manipulative, a desperate attempt to escape responsibility. The testimony was raw and shocking, with Erik describing in detail the alleged sexual abuse and how it scarred him. The jury, however, could not reach a unanimous verdict in the first trial. Mistrials were declared in 1994 for both brothers. The retrial that followed stripped away much of the abuse testimony, narrowing the focus back to the evidence of premeditated murder and financial motive. This time the verdict was decisive. Both Lyle and Erik were convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The brothers were sent to separate prisons, cutting off their daily contact for decades. Their lives behind bars became quieter, though their case continued to generate debate in documentaries, books, and television dramatizations. In a surprising twist, decades later, renewed attention to their claims of abuse led to advocacy groups pushing for reconsideration. By 2023, a new trial was ordered, citing concerns about how abuse testimony had been limited during their retrial. And in 2024, for the first time in decades, the Menendez brothers stood in a courtroom again, no longer as fresh-faced young men, but as middle-aged inmates seeking a second chance. The legal outcome of this new trial is still unfolding, but its existence underscores the enduring complexity of their story. Were the Menendez brothers greedy killers or abused sons pushed to a breaking point? The Menendez case did not end with the guilty verdicts. If anything, that was just the beginning of decades of cultural, psychological, and legal re-examination. In the years after their convictions, both brothers gave interviews that pulled the public in two directions. Lyle spoke calmly about the abuse they suffered, describing a household where appearances were everything but secrets festered in silence. Erik, often more emotional, broke down in tears when recounting his father's alleged sexual abuse. These accounts clashed with the cold reality of their actions, firing shotgun blasts into their parents at close range. Psychologists have long debated the case. Some argue that the brothers displayed classic signs of trauma, fear, suppressed rage, and a desperate attempt at liberation. Others view the abuse narrative as a convenient justification, pointing to the extravagant shopping spree as proof of motive. The truth perhaps lies in a darker middle ground. Years of dysfunction and control collided with greed and entitlement, creating an explosive outcome. The case also revealed how divided society could be. Some believed the brothers were cold-blooded killers who murdered for money. Others saw them as victims who acted out of desperation. Their actions horrific, but rooted in years of suffering. Documentaries, books, and dramatizations like Law and Order, True Crime, the Menendez murders kept this debate alive for decades. Then came the shocking development in 2023. A new trial was ordered, reigniting the question of whether justice had been properly served. The legal reasoning pointed to the suppression of key abuse testimony during the retrial. This raised uncomfortable questions. If a jury had been allowed to fully hear about the years of alleged abuse, would the verdict have been different? This new trial, unfolding as of 2025, once again divides the public. Was this justice being corrected, or a reopening of old wounds that never fully healed? Supporters of the brothers argue they deserve a fair chance to have all the evidence heard. Critics believe this is a dangerous precedent, a relitigation of a case already decided beyond reasonable doubt. What remains undeniable is the enduring fascination with the Menendez brothers. They symbolize not just a brutal crime, but a complex intersection of family, trauma, wealth, and justice. Every revelation, every interview, every new trial, detail forces people to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, abuse, and the blurred lines between victim and perpetrator. The Menendez case is not just history, it is still being written. As we stand here in 2025, the Menendez brothers' story is still unfolding. 3 decades after that August night in Beverly Hills, what began as a brutal double murder has transformed into one of the most debated cases in American legal history, one that continues to divide families, courts, and public opinion. Lyle and Erik remain behind bars, awaiting the outcome of their newly granted trial. For some, this represents a long overdue chance at justice, a chance to fully weigh the abuse allegations against the crime itself. For others, it feels like history being rewritten, a dangerous reopening of wounds that were already sealed by guilty verdicts decades ago. What is clear is that the Menendez brothers are no longer just names in a court transcript. They have become symbols of deeper questions. What does justice look like in families torn apart by violence and trauma? How do we weigh privilege against pain, abuse against accountability? And most haunting of all, can love and loyalty truly exist in a home ruled by fear? For Kitty and Jose Menendez, the story ended in tragedy. But for the public, for the courts, and for the brothers themselves, the story is still alive, still demanding answers. And maybe that is why the Menendez case has endured for so long, because it forces us to look closer, to ask not just what happened, but why. If you have followed this case with us tonight, I would like to hear your thoughts. Do you believe the brothers acted out of desperation or out of greed? Do you think the new trial will change the verdict? Or do you believe justice was already served back in the 1990s? Share your perspective in the comments. I will be reading. And if you want to stay with us as we continue to explore true stories where family ties turn deadly, do not forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join us next time for another case that chills to the bone. Until then, stay safe and never forget, sometimes the greatest danger does not come from outside the home. It is already sitting at the dinner table,